Welcome everyone to Bobby Talks, ... Those dots are there to tell you that there's always more to the story, and today's story is abortion. It's probably topic one, if not 1A here in America. It's top of the priority list right now since the Supreme Court has went ahead and leaked their documents talking about how they're going to be potentially overruling Roe v. Wade. The past 50 years, Roe v. Wade has been in place. And today, I'm very excited. I have a guest all the way from Vancouver, Canada. I found this lady on one of the Facebook podcast groups. She was the first person just as soon as the leak came out. She was the first person to jump on this Facebook group and kind of throw her hand in her hat in the ring to want to talk and discuss this. I'm very excited to have her. She is a registered therapeutic counselor out of her own private practice there in Vancouver. She also has, she's also known as a certified abortion doula. And she also goes as Kari Gundersen. And Kari, she's joining us now. How are you doing, Kari?
Hi, I'm doing pretty good. How are you today, Bobby?
I'm not doing too bad. Not doing too bad. This is going to be an interesting conversation that you and I are going to have. Because we were saying off camera, I would probably say underqualified to have this conversation as far as, I'm a white male. I'm a male, and we're going to be talking about women's reproductive organs and women's bodies and the right to choose. And I will qualify by saying, given that I'm a male, we tend to feel like we're disqualified from the conversation because of that matter. I think the thing that kind of gets to my core a little bit is that I feel like this is a human being issue, not just a woman's rights issue. When I say that to you, do you agree, disagree? What's your thoughts on that?
Okay. I think that in the issue that you raise here calls to the question of when personhood begins,
Sure.
right? So in some people's mind, it begins at conception. In some people's mind, when the original abortion restrictions came into law, it was said that it had to be before the quickening, which was 15 to 20 weeks. And there's a variety of perspectives on this um, under the question of personhood. I don't know how far I should go along that
No,
one
you're fine.
line.
Yeah. I was just curious. So, in your eyes, that has to be the table has to be set to where does personhood begin for you to acknowledge whether or not it's a human being issue versus a woman's right to choose. Is that correct?
I think that that's the sort of underlying question or point that I kind of detect in your question. Do I
Okay.
understand correctly?
Yeah. Um, this is where my audience always gets mad at me. But what I want to do is I want to put that personhood question on hold. I do want to come back to it because I think it's interesting that we have that conversation, especially male to female, especially someone, there's another interesting perspective that you're going to bring to the conversation today. And that's just the fact that you're not an American, right? And that you guys have your own way of doing things in Canada. And if I remember correctly, you were telling me just as a disclaimer, just keep in mind that not only is abortion legal here in our country, it's also covered by the universal healthcare. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. In fact, in Canada, abortion is legal nationally across coast to coast
Okay.
through all states of pregnancy and without any particular reason or cause or qualifier. It's called abortion on demand. So literally anybody can say, please may I have an abortion? And yes, you may. At least it's not a criminal issue in Canada. We're a healthcare country. So there's healthcare available to you whether you decide to carry your pregnancy to term or whether you decide to terminate that pregnancy. Healthcare is available and covered.
And you said that was during any stage.
It's not a criminal issue during any stage. It would be considered a healthcare issue. That being said, most abortion procedures are done in the first trimester, some up to the second, even to the end of the second trimester. There are very few abortion providers who would provide it past the second trimester.
Now, when you say that there's very few abortion providers that would do it in the last trimester, is that legally allowed? I mean, if someone wanted to have an abortion on demand in that trimester and they were to refuse them that right, is that something that could go to litigation in a court somewhere, or is it based on each practice's terms?
Yeah, so it wouldn't ever be a criminal issue. Um, of what we're finding in Canada with totally broad, unrestricted abortion access is that I think I read 10 of 1,000. So is that 1% of pregnancies result in abortion?
Okay.
And so, and then most of them are done before like 13 weeks up until, so the second trimester would be after 3 months up to 6 months. By the time a person has carried their pregnancy up to 6 months, the decision wouldn't be, you know what, I'm out. I don't think I'm ready for it. I don't think I'm into it or I want this. That decision would be made for because the pregnancy is either threatening the mother's life or the child is suffering such intense development disabilities that their life may not be particularly viable. So it wouldn't just be an act of irresponsibility to suddenly at 8 months go, I think I've changed my mind.
Right.
It,
Right.
and if a person were expressing something like that, I think it would still be considered a medical issue because then you're dealing with someone who is perhaps medically or emotionally unstable to take on the task of parenthood. So it just at no point does it become a criminal situation in Canada.
So that's by and that's in the laws of the government, right?
Yeah,
So let's
nationwide.
just out of curiosity then, what is the because you guys, I don't know what your Republicans and liberals are or Democrats are up there, what your parties are, but
Okay.
is there anybody, is that just common practice amongst everybody who kind of has that same thought process that it's not a criminal act, or do you guys have kind of that back and forth diatribe with each other there as we do here?
Okay, so a big difference between American and Canadian politics and therefore law is that you guys have like a two-party system. In
Yeah,
Canada, we have a multi-party system. So I had to look it up, and there was actually a little over 20 registered political parties in Canada, but there are five dominant ones who get all the media attention and support. And of those five, four of them are unanimously oppose any restriction on abortion rights and
interesting.
reproductive rights. And one of them, who would be our Conservative Party, our right wing GOP, this party is, let's say, divided.
No, they're divided. They're not even completely together on that front. As a conservative, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
Just interesting how a border can give us different perspective on things. Um, that I think we will have quite the conversation you and I will have today, because I am someone who considers himself center to left in this country, more on the liberal side of things. So technically, by my nomenclature, I suppose, or by if you want to pigeonhole me into one side, in this country, I should be pro-choice. I am. That is probably one of the few topics in this particular country that I am against the liberal side on. And I've always kind of stated it like this. I've always felt like the Democrats are backwards on this issue because they're always pro civil liberties and pro, the betterment and of human life as it is. And I've always felt like, and that particular topic, they were kind of backwards on it. And I would have interesting conversations with a lot of friends on this that, would disagree with me or would agree with me on, whether they're conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter. It's just, like I said at the beginning of the show, I think it's a human being issue, but it does always come back to that. When does personhood begin? And since we've mentioned it, I think let's go with that. And then after that, I kind of want to transition into Roe v. Wade specifically, kind of understanding that, or legislation and the court case itself specifically. Do you know too much on the Roe v. Wade court case?
I know a little bit about it. I'm not a legal expert or analyst, but
Sure.
I've read enough articles to look into the background of it.
Okay. Okay, so that's kind of going to lay out the next probably 5-10 minutes for our audience and yourself as well. In your opinion, Kari, when does personhood begin? And this is when everybody just kind of glues to the TV.
So let's start with there's a wide variety of perspectives,
Sure.
right? What might be known as for people who believe in reincarnation, the soul is ever present and never leaves. For other people, it's, as we referred to earlier, the quickening, 15 to 20 weeks, where the change from a lump of cells becomes perhaps when a heartbeat is detected. And for others, it's not until the child is actually born and granted rights and citizenship that there aren't rights and citizenship granted upon a fetus.
That's interesting. Um, so that's all the perspectives.
Well, actually, there's more still.
No,
I'll
no,
just
I
mention.
believe that. I'm saying, do you specifically have one that like, or in your position of field, do you try not to have a, um, a hard stance on this topic because you're trying to be open, for all of those cases, depending, or all those perspectives? Like, what is your thought? I guess I'm trying to
Yeah.
pigeonhole you into something, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm being fair to you. Do you have a stance on it, or do you remove yourself from that because of your work?
I'll say this, as an abortion doula, it's my role to support the person going through the situation so that they can have enough information to feel like they're making an informed decision, whichever way they decide. That they are empowered to choose as well as to change their mind as many times as they choose, and to be supportive of that person wherever they fall on it. So I'm a caregiver to the person making their choice. I'm not there to influence that they should choose one way or another, or to convince or coerce them with facts about when I think personhood begins or when it becomes morally viable or permissible. It's my job to support a person wherever they fall on it, just who's going through, who's considering, who's seeking information on the process.
Yeah, it's really tough, right? Because I teach a leadership class, and I teach it 3 hours a day, and during election season, kids are all the time asking me, "Who you voting for? Who you voting for?" And I believe in transparency, so I tell them, but at the same time, I try not to, um, show any dishate or what's the word I'm looking for? Show my hand one way or the other too much, because I want them to. I'll say, who would you vote for? Or we'll have that conversation. I want them to formulate their own opinion and have them be their own person. So you kind of you put yourself out there a little bit, but at the same time, you remove yourself enough so that you are not, just putting yourself or opinions onto someone else. You want them to be able to have that room to
Yeah.
find them in there as well, right?
Yeah. I don't want someone to choose because of how I feel. I don't want to
Right.
make them feel like if they like me, that they should agree with me or do what I think is best. I
Yeah.
want people to do what they think is best for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of being in such a multi-cultural kind of country, and like I say, with these like five main political groups, is we sort of operate more on the assumption that you probably practice faith or come from a culture that I probably know nothing about.
Right.
So all of our policies are sort of built on the fact of like, it's best for you to decide amongst, go, if you want to make a faith-based decision, go seek morality from your faith leader. If you want to make a science-based decision, go seek the morality of your science-based leader. And my position is to support you whichever way, to get you that information so you can make your own decision.
See, and that's where I think that's where I formulate my opinion from, is that I tend to go science based. But I also I'm from the Church of the Human Race is the way I look at it. I believe that there's something greater and bigger than us, but I would call myself an agnostic if I had to, just because of the fact that like I don't have a subscribe to a certain religious belief anymore. I was raised Catholic, but like even as I got older, I was just, I kind of, the golden rule is kind of the way I live my life, right? And I kind of try to be an all inclusive person. With that being said, when we talk about conception or you talk about when personhood begins, if someone, we always have this conversation, right? About like when someone finds out they're pregnant, and I get it, it's at different times, some people find out later in stages that they're pregnant, right? Um, I just don't fully, and this is the part where my body, my choice. I don't, before I say what I'm about to say, let me just say a couple things. One, I had no control over being born a man any more than you had control over being a woman. We had no control over this game of life and how the rules would be set and how we would have to play the game. I was given different parts, so are you, and therefore there's different responsibilities that come with that. Unfortunate or fortunate, whatever way you want to look at that. With that being said, um, I do look at it more as a human being issue, and I do tend to look at whenever you can call them a lump of cells, but those are living cells that will eventually turn into a fetus, and they grow into later stages. They grow. It's a human being in my eyes, right? It's not going to be anything else. That's the simplest version of that. Um, where I tend to get frustrated is when I hear, and this would be interesting, this abortion on demand. And I get kind of the blanket reason for legality issues, for it just makes things cleaner. But as far as a moral place, it makes things a lot dirtier, in my opinion. Just for the fact of it does leave open to all these irresponsible, if they choose to continue to have that. I don't know. I tend to think that personhood begins the moment it begins, and that would be, it doesn't mean it begins the moment you find out, but it begins the moment it begins, and that's early on, and I think that's going to be nothing but a human being. And my question then becomes, who has the voice for that unborn baby? Um,
Mhm.
and I
Okay.
tend to try to take it back to like, if a mother decided to smoke or drink during a pregnancy, well, technically it's not illegal to do that. Um, you would hope that they wouldn't do such a thing. Um, yeah, that's my rambling for what I believe in, I guess. I just want to make sure that my audience knows, and that you and I are going to still probably have this dialogue today, and maybe we're on opposite sides, or maybe we're not. I don't know.
Okay. I'll pose a question. So,
Please do.
um, okay. So even if a fetus is a person, even if that's true, and they are,
Sure.
even then, why would it make it a criminal issue that I must provide my body and its life supportive functions in order to keep that person alive?
No, 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 no.
For
So,
example, hang on, I'm not
sorry. Go
finished.
ahead. Sorry. Yep. Sorry.
So if a grown person is suffering kidney failure and needs dialysis in order to stay alive, am I criminally responsible for denying that person the use of my body? Am I going to go to jail if I don't allow that person to live by being hooked up to my body so they can have dialysis? The same way that it would be permissible for me to unplug and therefore deny my life-giving capacity to that person,
Sure.
resulting in that person's death, right? An abortion doesn't refer to the killing of a child. It refers to aborting the process of me providing my life-giving capacities to another human. I'm not required by law. If you're walking around in public and somebody has a heart attack or suddenly needs CPR, everyone isn't going to jail that didn't give CPR, because maybe we didn't really know how to do it right. Maybe it's best that you didn't.
That's
The
interesting you say that, because there are certain states that do make you that if you are a card carrying CPR holder, um, you do have a legal obligation to do that.
Who's a card carrying life giver, like who's a card carrying
Right. No,
parent.
no, your point's taken. I'm just saying it's interesting that you said that. I
Yeah.
would say this. I totally agree with you in the sense of your body versus the baby's body, right? Um, in the sense of medical conditions that could be life threatening in any capacity. Totally understand that. I'm with you. Um, that's why, to me, this is a gray area. If it was black and white, we would have a simple answer, right? But with that being said, I do think that there is room to have conversation. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I do think there's room to have conversation where we can kind of come to a, I don't want to say compromise, but like, because to some, what you just said, a lot of people would say, too bad. And I don't think that that's fair. And I don't think that that's right either.
Too bad to whom?
To the mother, that they would have to given to certain beliefs or certain morals or religious backgrounds. Some would say too bad to the mother there, that they you go down with the ship, so to speak. And I don't agree with that.
But that moral, if they hold that moral position, then those are their morals that they
Right.
decide by. They don't get to govern a person with different morals. You're allowed to go, oh, I
Right.
have different morals than you,
Right.
but you can't legalize your morals on a different person who
But
doesn't share that.
unfortunately, our morals. they block our thinking and they push our politics and our narratives and our policies sometimes. So like that's the point, right, to what I was trying to get at. No, I totally agree. What I think the conversation should be is, if it's life threatening and it can be proven, and I think those should be left up to the woman, and to the doctors. I think those conversations should be then, and we should remove ourselves and all of our thinking from that completely together. The issues that I take place is abortion on demand. It doesn't. I could go in with the fact that I just don't want to do this,
Yes.
and there not be a medical health condition. Um,
Yes.
and that's in your country. Now, bringing it back to my country, um, you know, some of that does take place in certain states already as well. And I get your whole non-criminal act, and I get that, but at the same time, I would look at it as that's an irresponsible thing to do, just because you don't want to. You are, in my opinion, you are choosing to. You can use the term murder, you can use the term eliminate or abort a child, a human being, all to the fact that it will inconvenience your life. And I don't know the statistics. Maybe you do. What are the statistics of those cases in your country of just maybe there is not a medical health condition, or maybe there isn't an underlying compromising of health. It's just, let's just use the word irresponsible because we've been doing that. And maybe you're uncomfortable with that label, but let's just keep using it for now, unless you got a better word. What are the statistics in your country? Do you know? Are you familiar with how much versus medical health conditions?
In this country, no reason need be provided. So I
Okay,
don't
so since that, you
imagine
don't
that
even have to keep track of it.
I don't know that they're being tracked. Perhaps they are. I just know that none is required. No qualification is necessary to go along with the ask.
Would that change your opinion if you found out that it was dramatically one way over the other? Would that change the conversation if they were um, more of, let's just say, more of those cases rather than the medical health? Would that change your opinion? Would that change this conversation and the narratives at all?
I think it requires a bit of unpacking to say that a person is making an irresponsible choice to choose to terminate a pregnancy. I think that often that person is making the most responsible choice because they may be aware that they're not emotionally or financially capable of supporting a child, that they may not be in a positive mental state or mental space, that they may not have the network of support that's required. A person may be terminating because they're about to begin their education, their career. They want to put certain things first before they decide to become to start a family. And so deciding that you are going to have that you must have a child just because you happen to be 16, I don't think that that's a responsible choice either. I think that's irresponsible to force somebody who's a minor to become a parent. If that person applied to adopt a child, they'd say, sorry, you're denied adoption because you're not capable. You're not in a state of competence. So by their own definition, they say you're not competent enough to become a parent. But if you got pregnant through rape or incest or through consensual sex, now all of a sudden you have that competency, you have that network of support. You don't.
So I agree with you in that incest, rape. I'm totally with you, and I think that's where I'm always with medical conditions. I'm always for that conversation. What unfortunately I can't get on board with is this idea that, and you used 16. I was just, it could be anybody of any age, of any irresponsible night that turns into a night of lust or a night of whatever that somehow got out of hand. But what I don't like is that too. I don't like the fact that that person has a say, and now the one that doesn't have a voice yet doesn't have a say on that, because I'm sure they would have a difference of opinion. And second, it feels like it eradicates them of any responsibility at all of their decision making months prior. Now, you never want to look at a child as a punishment, right? But if you're looking at this idea of maybe giving it up for adoption, and then there's the conversation of adoption agencies and foster cares and how they're all over populated right now as it is, and how I get it. I'm just saying the conversation, when you talk about China had a rule a few years back, they had a law, a one child per, people thought that was inhumane, to be able to put a number on, and there's reasons for it. There's legitimate reasons for why, you talk about resources and sustainability of life. But at the end of the day, in a free world, you would like to see all human beings have their day in the sun, and that includes the unborn as well. I wanted to ask you a question, and my phone won't open up for some reason. Fingerprint not recognized. Oh, here we go. So in this particular case, when we talk about them making a responsible choice because maybe they're not suitable to be a parent yet, okay. And I'm 35 years old without children, and I teach a bunch of children, so I kind of feel like they're mine at times. But I do get to leave them at night, and I don't have to carry the responsibility of their decisions with me. Isn't there something to be said, though, like maybe if you talk more about the trauma that might come from someone who's not necessarily ready, right, to be a parent, whether they're 16 or 35, and they aren't financially ready or whatever it is, because some would argue that they're never financially ready to be a parent. You're taking on a third, fourth, and maybe fifth life. When you look at having the right to live versus someone eradicating themselves of their trauma, do those feel like a balanced scale to you? Because to me, at the end of the day, I as much as I empathize with people's mental health issues and people's economic struggles, I still think that we would choose a person's right to live and try to figure out how to overcome. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I grasped the whole concept of the question, but I'll say I think that a person's right to live is separate from a person's right to use my body, in order to stay alive. Right? In Canada, at least, the host body is the person who has sovereignty, who has the power to choose, right? And it's the woman's right to make her own decision whether she wants to use her body for that purpose or not. I don't think I think there's a very dangerous hill we can slide down here, that because a person has consented to sex, that this means that they have somehow tacitly consented to also becoming a parent. The thing I don't like about that is, where does it end? Like, and even where does it begin? If I consent to oral sex, does that mean I have tacitly consented to vaginal sex? If I consent to vaginal sex, have I tacitly consented to anal sex? We don't. Consent requires the presence of a yes, not the absence of a no.
Yep, I
And
understand.
and this, I think, is a really important point. The other aspect of consent is to be true consent, we must be free of coercion. And as long as it's a criminal issue, we're not free of coercion, because there's coercion on behalf of the justice system.
Yeah, so I tend to, and just so we're clear, I'm totally aware that you and I are we're having two different conversations here, because mine's more of just and I mean that with all due respect. Like, everything you're telling me is coming from a criminal perspective of whether or not these should be criminal.
Yeah, it's just a
Yeah,
healthcare issue up here.
yep.
For me, it's for me, it's exactly as immoral as having your wisdom teeth pulled, or having a vasectomy. It's just a medical procedure, and that's part of my function as an abortion doula, is to help normalize, to make the word okay to say, and to help normalize it as simply a medical procedure.
Yeah, and that's where we lose each other, right? Is because that's, to me, so like, just if I could finish up off of your thought then, and then we'll kind of go to Roe v. Wade, because we're getting a little long here. Is you had said if I consent to, what do you got there? You got a little cat?
Sorry, you can probably hear her in the
Oh,
background.
you're okay. You're okay. What's your cat's name?
Amber.
Amber is wanting to give Amber a mic. Wonder what her thoughts are on this.
Sorry.
I get what you were saying with the consent. The issue I take is that with a bit of consent we give in whatever aspect of life we're doing, there are a set of responsibilities that come with that consent, and there are a set of consequences that could come as well. So if I choose to go faster than the speed limit into a corner, I could go off the the road. There could be an accident that comes from that. If I choose to have a consensual night of sex that's unprotected, I could become pregnant from that. I could, have a child off of that. And that's, I think I don't want to know if I'm trying to stay away from like, these trigger words that tend to get people off of the focus of what I think we're having a great conversation. But like, in the sense of two people that have consented to having sex with each other, like I said, there's consequences that come from that. And being able in a non-medical health condition world, being able to just kind of remove yourself from any of the responsibilities that come from that, that's where I have an issue with it. But again, it's moral versus criminal, and I know we're having two different conversations. I wanted to ask you, Kari, give us, if you can, for the audience, because I think a lot of times people think they understand Roe v. Wade, but they don't really understand Roe v. Wade. And I know that's a very specific thing to American politics versus Canada, but was that used in Canada as a kind of a jump off point for maybe their thinking, or was there something completely separate in your guys's country?
That's a great question. I guess I would imagine it to be a part of the like evolving social fabric at that time, but I think that in Canada it actually became loosened with I think it was Pierre Trudeau who put forth this, and he'd be the father of our current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He put forth this. His famous quote was, "The government has no place in the bedrooms of the people." And so, similarly to Roe versus Wade, it's actually a question of privacy. And so, it's tied not only to the right to choose whether to terminate a pregnancy, it's also, and again, I'm not a legal expert, it's also tied to like homosexuality, where it lies in the law, and other aspects like that. Again, I'm not a legal
Sure.
analyst, but it's not based on the moral decision, it's based on uh, the right to privacy.
Okay. Gotcha. Um, so now that we further understand that, can you kind of wrap up what you just like a brief summary of Roe v. Wade, and how this interesting case down in Texas kind of became the
Yeah,
federal thing that it became for the last 50 years, and
yeah,
gave the right to choose to an abortion legal for states that wanted to?
sure. Yeah. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but my
Sure.
understanding of it is that uh, um, isn't it based off of a couple who were, the woman had like a neurobiological, I'm sorry, some form of neurological disability, and was married, and the couple didn't want to abstain from sex, and what if contraception fails? So the question was, shouldn't she be allowed to have abortions because she chooses not to become a parent? Because of her disability, they said that she shouldn't carry a child to term nor raise a child. And so here's a person who's been deemed uh, unfit for parenthood or incompetent to take on the multiple responsibilities of parenthood. So I think, as my understanding is, Roe v. Wade fall to that question: shouldn't that person be allowed to have an abortion? Like, shouldn't there be extenuating circumstances, where it's considered permissible?
Sure. Sure.
Am I,
And
do I
that,
understand?
yeah, yeah, yes. And then it got to the Supreme Court level, and then that's when everything went the way that it did. So, um, with that being said, there are going to be a lot of implications that come from this very conservative Supreme Court that exists here in America. And we're talking about overturning 50 years of the way something was, and there will be repercussions on both sides of this thing. Um, I guess let's start here then. You being a registered therapeutic counselor, so in a sense, somebody goes in, let's say in Canada, somebody goes into a to get an abortion. Um, as much as people try to say how simple and easy that is for them to do, there is quite a lot of I don't want to say baggage, but of mental, maybe mental baggage that comes with that as a result of making that decision, because it isn't an easy decision to make for most people. And so in your case, you're there part of the process as a doula, And then you also probably have conversations with others as a registered therapeutic counselor. So, with this overturning of this, do you think we will revert backwards in this country to some of the kind of black market way of doing abortions? Or do you think people, since it is going to be left open to the states, just kind of returning it back to the states' rights, which is, let's just be clear, that's what this would mean, is that if Michigan wanted to do an abortion, they could, but Texas would also have the right to decline it or deny it. Um, what do you think are the implications that come with this sounds like inevitable overturning of this Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, well, this is a really great and important question. I think that you can't stop abortion, you can only stop safe abortion. I think that because abortion on demand is provided in like 50% of the countries on the planet, and this is purely an American, a USA issue, that any woman with the means, privileges, and resources to have a passport and be able to get across the border will still have access to safe abortion. So, really, what this does is it targets poor people, especially poor women of color. So,
Okay.
it's a specific target against that group.
How so?
Um,
How does that make sense to somebody here that's listening to this?
Sure, because anybody who's wealthy enough to get out of the country can just come up, drive up to Vancouver and get your abortion right here and be home, the next day, right? So it's the only people who will no longer be able to access safe legal abortion in the United States will be people who don't have the access to be able to get out of town, to be able to leave their state or to cross the border in order to get it. Right? So a person has to be poor enough and disadvantaged enough not to be able to rise up above the law. Anybody with a passport who can get to Canada can still have an abortion. It's just
And
that if they do it in your country, those providers would be, have legal exposure.
I was talking
So
more specifically the color portion, but I know what you're saying. You're saying that women of color tend to be the most disadvantaged people in our. Yes. Okay.
yeah,
I
so
just wanted to.
70%, I think, in America of people live in the home that they own of white people. 70% of white families live in occupant owned homes, and only 40% for the Black community. So we can see that, nobody needs to explain that white people are richer than people of
Right.
color, generally,
Right.
generally speaking, across, I'm sure some economists can prove that quite simply. So really what this does is it creates a pipeline of BIPOC women and men into the justice system, and it disproportionately affects and weighs on them more so than the rich, wealthy, white, able-bodied. They're
So,
going to be relatively untouched.
well, without getting too graphic with answering this question, what will happen? What will happen? How
Yeah,
will people see? Because you said people won't
yeah,
stop getting
yeah,
abortions. What does that mean?
yeah.
Where will they? How will that happen?
So in the instance of forced pregnancy, where a person must become a parent against their will, we're going to see all of the things. We're going to see crime go up. We're going to see dependence on welfare go up, education go down, addiction go up, homelessness go up, poverty is increased, right? And so the exact opposite happens when abortion is free and accessible. The exact opposite. Crime goes down, education goes up, addiction goes down, homelessness goes down, because people aren't stretching to try to accommodate as many children as they possibly can in their home, right? People are able to plan their families and go, oh, I'm going to have one child after I'm finished my degree and I'm settled in my career, or once I'm, own a home or whatever. Each person can decide for themselves when is the right time for them.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
That's kind of because that's what was happening prior to Roe v. Wade. People were
Yeah.
still having abortions, and they were just. I mean, there were some really graphic, nasty ways that was taking place. So
Yeah, you can only stop safe abortion. You can't
yeah,
stop abortion. All
sure.
you do is put people at risk, especially in the states where you have medical fees. The people who then have to have unsafe abortions then have to deal with infections and all the different kinds of things, and all this costs them more and more and more money, right?
See, you see, that to me is where this becomes a separate conversation to me, right? So like, I always tend to. I'll give you an example. In the case of drugs, right? So I've never smoked or drank a day in my life. Now that's my personal choice, right? That's just kind of who I became as a person. And now it's pretty much my identity. If I was to go against that, I would feel like I would lose who I am as a person. Now that's me. With that being said, I also thought marijuana should be legal, right? It felt inevitable. It felt like more, majority of the population, indulges in this. I think if it's safe or legal, it will be done safer. It will be, that's just my thought, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm agreeing with I've been converted here. But what I do is, as a leader, is that you do tend to say, okay, these things feel inevitable at times. Okay, are we stopping abortion by making them illegal? Well, maybe you are. Maybe you are. Um, I'm sure there is a percentage that does favor that when you do that. However, like you said, there are all these byproducts that come from it, whether it be, education rate goes down, drug abuse, all these things go up. So I understand that. As a leader, I do think it's a fair question to bring it to the table and say, are we doing our society a justice or a service or a disservice by doing this? So I get you on that. And I do think that for people that want to make this a non-negotiable, which they do, I do think that there's a place at the table for this conversation. Ultimately, whether or not they should or not, that's still left to the decision makers. I wanted to bring up something to you that is interesting because this is something that's relatively new. Technology now could save this whole conversation down the road. And I wonder what women, and you being one, and you having conversations with women, especially specifically in this area, what you think of this. So there's a lot of movement that's taking place about trying to solve this issue of abortion by being able to remove. And forgive me, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biological expert on how all this works, but like removing the cells once they found out they're pregnant, instead of aborting them, being able to transfer them to people that would want to be pregnant that maybe medically can't get pregnant, or into surrogates of people who maybe feel so strongly against abortion who would be willing to carry for 9 months. Because it sounds like there's a lot of people, they've done their research, that there's a market for this. What are your thoughts on this technology that could be as early as 10 years away, maybe as late as 20 years away, and maybe it just eliminates this conversation of abortion altogether? Have you heard of this? Have you read up on any of this at all? And just your thoughts.
I have never heard of that. I have never read anything about that. If I'm not a medical expert or a medical care provider, if that technology exists, it's completely new to me. I'm not sure why that would be preferable to just something like IVF to sort of like implant, with your own egg, and, the sort of technologies that exist now. I'm not clear on, I've literally never heard of that. Pregnancy, like transplantation.
Yes, it's exactly what it is. It would be transferring from one to another. I found that to be fascinating when I came upon this, like, I think a year ago, and I was like, man, if that happens, that's a game changer, because then we can quit yelling at each other and maybe potentially get to some progress. And it just kind of goes back to this idea of technology and the way it changes the world. But you haven't heard of this, so there's not too much we can.
I've literally never heard of that.
Would that be something that you think, what would be an indicator to make that take away, someone wanting to get an abortion, right? Would it have to be a non-invasive procedure? Like, how would that, like, for that to be something that you'd be like, okay, yes, this seems to make more sense than aborting this child or giving it up for adoption or whatever you may have?
Yeah. Again, I have no moral objection to it. If other people decide that they're morally in alignment with that, then I'm okay with that. They're not forcing me to do it, right?
Sure.
If two families are both consenting to do that, that's okay with me. But it would be important to be able to indicate that both parties had made that choice, because, like I say, in Canada, the woman is sovereign. It's her choice, completely up to her what she chooses to do with it. I would hope that they weren't like coerced into or influenced into any kind of pipeline where it felt like it was like financially viable to do that somehow. Like I wouldn't want to make some sort of financial incentive driving
Sure.
people towards doing that. But maybe that's because you have like more of a for-profit healthcare system than we have. There
Yeah.
wouldn't be like a market. I don't know what that means really, like in Canada. Like it's available for everyone. No one has to do it, but it's there for the people who choose, and the people who don't have it, right?
So you use the term financials, and I always
Mhm.
think this plays a big indicator, especially in America, right? You know, it's God, guns, and country type thing. Um,
Okay.
just to simplify it, you know, um, it kind of feels like when I say country, though, I feel like the economics portion of it. So, like, you know, the money portion when it comes to, especially in Canada. So somebody pays for that. Somebody pays for um, those procedures, and is there no conversations taking place, or does it take place in your country, or people debating whether or not these types of procedures should be paid for and covered by the people in their their tax paying money?
So it's free and accessible in like by a physician in like hospital care, and then if a person chooses, they could go to a private clinic where there you do pay a
Okay.
service fee or an administrative fee or whatever. Also, there's different kinds of abortions. There's a medical intervention kind of abortion, which is where they go up inside. Most people these days, where it's safe, I guess, where a medical person has decided, it's a chemical abortion. You take a couple of pills in the office, a couple of pills, I think 12 hours later or something. Again, I'm not the medical provider. That should I provide for the mind and the heart of the person going through it. So if I don't know all of the surgical details, forgive. But I think
Yeah.
an important thing I really want to stress here is, it really comes to be about, it asks the question, who has the power?
Right.
Who gets to make this decision, right? So overturning Roe v. Wade says the decision is not the woman; it's in the hands of the court. That the woman, the person pregnant, the person whose body is in question, is subordinate.
Right.
Okay, women have a second layer of power beneath the government, the state, who have determined that they have a higher deciding making power than the person whose body is in question.
Right.
Also, we've all probably seen this floating around on social media. One male person can cause hundreds of pregnancies in 1 year, and one
Sure.
female person could carry one pregnancy to term, or maybe two, or maybe three partial pregnancies to the point of termination. So this is not an objective towards reducing pregnancy or unwanted pregnancy. This is about taking power from women.
Right. And I understand that. I get the conversation. Again, I go back to we were born into a world of life that I had no control over. Like you are absolutely correct. I could spread my seed every single where I go, and it would be just as irresponsible, you know, to do that and walk away from it. I totally get that. With that being said, that is something that can be done. Um, and whether or not you can argue whether or not there should be criminal action there, maybe, or should I not? Should I have the right to be able to go and do that? That's an interesting conversation. Actually, one that I might make a podcast out of. So thank you for that, Kari. You just gave me
Right?
episode 3 and 4. Yeah.
Right? Because overturning Roe versus Wade is not going to result in fewer unwanted pregnancies or
Sure.
in fewer unwanted children. All it does is give men the license to reproduce at will, willy nilly, all day long. And it takes away a woman's right over her reproductive functions. So all it does is target women.
I understand that. I get it. I do. The problem is that I guess I just don't think we're living like I don't I think what's trying to be done here is get everything to a fair place, right? Or an equal place. And I just don't know that we were ever born that way for it to be that way. And because it's a human being issue to me, I tend to I'm more of a pragmatist and more of a realist of saying, look, unfortunately, now what you're saying is the criminal aspect of it. Okay. So let's say somebody does have, and this is where I'm 100% in agreement with. is the idea that the government um, doesn't always make the best decisions, right? We've agreed that there is areas of gray, and sometimes they try to take areas of gray and make it a black and white issue, and then now somebody's facing criminal action because of it. That problem is that in some cases maybe there should be criminal action, and others maybe not. But you're leaving that up to, your government to decide that. And as we've talked about, they're not always batting 1,000 when it comes to that. So I get it. I totally understand and understand that narrative. That's a very slippery slope. With that being said, it does go back to the conversation of consent to things and whether or not you accept the fact that if I decide to have, unsafe sex, do I accept the fact that a consequence could come from that? And consequence
Right.
doesn't have to be good or bad, but there's a
Right.
consequence.
So what you're saying is because you have consented to vaginal sex, you have also consented to then being pegged.
Being paid, is that what you said?
Pegged.
Oh, pegged.
Right? Clearly, you can't. If you consent to one thing, then you've consented to all of the things. That's what you're saying.
That's not what I'm saying. No, what I'm saying is that if you and I decided to have consensual, well, I don't want to go this route, but if me and a partner decided to have consensual sex and we do it unsafely, we both as adults or both as people knowingly know if I can consciously tell you that a byproduct of having sex, okay, means that we could have a child, then what I am consenting is to the fact that I could potentially be a parent down the road. Or I could be somebody making very difficult decisions of whether or not to give up this child to an adoption agency and remove myself from that. But that is different from saying that everything is now consented. Like if you were talking about the incident of like oral sex, if someone consents to oral sex with me or vice versa, does that mean that I've consented to sexual? Of course not. That's two different complete things.
Right? Implied consent isn't the same thing. Consent really means we're allowed to withdraw consent at any point. I'm allowed, and you're allowed, and all people of all genders, we're allowed to consent up to a certain point and withdraw consent at any point. And no one is allowed to determine when it is that we withdraw consent. You're saying because we had unprotected sex, then you may not opt out of getting pregnant because that's a natural result of having unprotected sex. Right. Therefore, if we also get STDs from our unprotected sex, what you're saying is I may not opt out of having that STD. I can't go have a medical intervention to treat it. I just got to ride that STD out unmedicated with no medical intervention.
No, that's not the same. What I'm saying is we're correct. You're correct in the terms of if I consent to oral sex or vice versa, and I end up getting an STD, nobody's losing. There's no unborn fetus losing a life there. You're treating a medical condition.
Issue, though.
Right, but to us that is the black and white issue, right? To those that are in more of a moral center or more place on that versus the just looking at it from a criminal thing. So.
And you're fully entitled to your morality. I didn't come here to move you on the
No. And I feel like we've shifted here somehow, and I'm not sure how we got here. But all I was arguing is just saying that, if I was to choose to go faster than the speed limit into this curb and the car goes off the road, unfortunately, there are byproduct variables that take place that are outside of my control now because I made a decision. And one of those variables could be death. It could be severe injured. I can't just remove myself from that and say I no longer give consent to this injury that's about to happen to me because I decided to go fast into this curb. It's a very simplistic way of looking at that. I understand. That's just Canada, the way that's the analogy.
Country, so we would say, you drove your car off the road, healthcare.
Right.
You got pregnant while drunk, healthcare.
Right.
Right. So the criminal issue and the moral issue is very much the American piece of it.
Yes, it is. You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
We all have different morals. Everyone gets healthcare, right? If you think it's morally impermissible, don't have one. Right? If the next person beside you says that's totally morally permissible, then they ought to be legally allowed to make that choice for themselves. Your morals shouldn't regulate the next person. They do have different morals. They do.
They do. But all policies are made. All policies are made from human beings, and all human beings have morals. whether they're good or bad, they have their own set of lists. So
A
I think
wide
that's a good.
variety.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
A wide variety of different morals.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But policy still ends up getting made. And I think that's what pushes it. We are forever going to probably have the debate until technology saves us. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Kari, where can people find you if they were somebody? Are you just Vancouver only? Or since you're online, would you do Zooms and links with people that might want your services, or?
Yeah, so I do in-person office counseling in Vancouver on Mondays and Fridays. I'm available online every other day except closed Sundays.
Okay.
That being said, I'm licensed only to practice mainly just in British Columbia. I'm
Okay.
allowed to have some other, but best for this purposes, let me say my services are available as a therapist to British Columbians.
Gotcha.
And
I'm huge in British Columbia, by the way, just huge. There's Bobby Talk signs all over the place. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe someday.
But people can, if you're saying where can people find me,
Sure.
you can go to my website, which is my name, www.karigundersen.com. I think we're throwing a link up somewhere so you don't have to learn how to spell that on your own.
Yep.
On Facebook and on Instagram, you can find me under @Counselor Kari.
Okay. And I'll tell you what, I think people are going to reach out to you anyways and talk to you about how you knockout punched Mr. Bobby Talks on his own show. So kudos to you. I thought we had a great conversation. I think, and this is something that we talked about off air, is that it's important for me to remove my opinion and have the conversation, because conversation trumps all. I think if we all just get closed-minded and we don't ever discuss our differences, then we won't ever hear the other side. And there's no empathy to be had when we don't know what the other side is. So at the end of the day, nothing was solved here, but everything was talked about. And I really appreciate your time, Kari. Do you have anything else that you would like to say? Maybe to Amber? Tell Amber we said goodbye.
I'll
Is
just
there
say
any
thank
final
you
words
so
from
much.
you?
I'll just say thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be able to have this conversation. And I think the very nature of the fact that I'm in Canada, where it's completely a different scenario than what it is in America, I think that really helps to sort of shed the light on like what other possibilities are there, like
Sure.
the system that's in place in America is such a new situation. Abortion technology as we understand it has existed for 50 years, and women have been having abortions for millennia.
Right. Very well said, Kari. Very well said. For all of you that listen to this show, I think you got a really good one. There's a lot of things talked about and discussed. I appreciate it. I know Kari, this was her first podcast. I think she did brilliant. We talked about whether or not she'll start up her own. She said she's not ready for that. But if she ever does, I will promise to plug everything that you do. Again, if you guys like the show, follow, like, subscribe on all social media aspects. Share this if you can. Leave the Apple Podcast reviews, review on Spotify if you can. And most importantly, hit subscribe on YouTube. And we'll see you guys on down the road. Thanks.
Thank you.